Now let's take a look at the menu commands in detail. We'll start with File. We have File New, which we can use to create a new canvas. We can open a canvas with Open. We can open a recent document. We can choose Place, and Place is going to place an image into your currently selected document. I have this image of a light bulb that I'll place in here. If you're not sure what this means, go ahead and just click OK, but basically it just wants to know whether you want to use the color from the image you're placing or the color from the canvas that you're placing it into. I'm going to go ahead and just select Convert to Adobe RGB. Then we can choose the size of the image if we want to go ahead and control it that way. Let's say 25%, that makes it a bit bigger, or if we do 10%, that makes it smaller. We can constrain the aspect ratio, that way we don't squish or stretch it. And if the image has a transparent background, we're going to want to leave Retain Alpha checked so that the background remains transparent. Let's click on OK. Now our light bulb comes in. If we look in our layers here, we hide our canvas layer with the eyeball here. This checkerboard pattern shows us transparency, so anywhere where you can see the checker, that means that it's transparent. If we look here in the Layers panel, you can see the image came in on its own layer. It has the name of the image as the layer name. And so this is a way you can bring images into your document. I'm going to turn the eyeball back on for the canvas to bring that back in. Let's go back to the File menu. Underneath Place is Close, and we can use that to close our document. We've already looked at how to save. Save As lets us save a copy. Revert will revert the image back to its previously saved state. So for example, if I save this, I'll call it bulb, and I'll take this and move it down to the bottom corner here. And then if I go to File, Revert, that's going to put it back to its previously saved version. Let's go to the File menu. You can email an image. And this is just kind of an integrated way to send an image through email through Corel Painter. You can choose the name, you can choose the format. And when you click on Send Email, assuming that your email client is set up properly, then it should automatically create a new email and add your file as an attachment. Beneath that, we have Page Setup. We can use this for printing if we're going to be printing our artwork on a home printer. I'm not going to go into detail about printing, but this will let you set up your paper size, and it gives you some other options here. We'll go back to File, and we can choose Print, and then we can use Print to select our printer. There's also some other options here that we can explore if you're into printing. And then the last option is Exit, and that will close Corel Painter. Next, we'll move on to the Edit menu. We can undo and redo. So if I undo Layer Move, that was the only thing I did there. I can redo that if I want to. We can also fade, but in order to fade, we need to create an effect. So with this light bulb layer selected, we could go to Effects, Tonal Control, Adjust Colors. We'll need to commit this reference layer to an image layer. And we could increase the saturation, click on OK. Now if we go to Edit, Fade, we're going to fade that effect or reduce it a little bit when we move this slider. So if I wanted to be just a little bit saturated, I could do that. We'll go back to the Edit menu. The next option is Cut. Now I'll need to make a selection here, so I'll need to go to my rectangular selection tool. I'll select the top part of the light bulb, and we'll go to Edit, Cut. Now that's going to cut those pixels or that selection into your computer's memory. Now you can only have one thing in memory at a time, so you need to be careful not to cut or copy multiple times, or you might replace what you cut. But if you go to Edit, Paste, it's going to paste what you cut onto a new layer. So now that new layer is down here, and I could take that with the layer adjuster and move it around if I want to. I could also go to Edit, Copy, and then Edit, Paste. Now I've made a copy of that on a separate layer. I'm going to go ahead and delete that layer. I'm going to make a selection of the top of that top of the light bulb. I'm going to go to Edit, Cut, and this time I'll go to Paste in Place. When I paste it in place, it pastes it in the exact location it was cut from, just on a separate layer. I'm going to go back to the Edit menu. We can also paste a new image, so I could paste that piece into its own separate image if I wanted to. I, of course, need to save that if I wanted to do that. I'm going to go ahead and close that. Go back to the Edit menu, and I can clear. Now what clear is going to do is it's going to clear whatever pixels are selected. So I'll make a selection of this top layer here, and I'll go to Edit, Clear. Now we looked at how to clear stuff earlier using backspace. The difference between backspace and clear is that clear will keep your selection active, whereas backspace will deselect it after clearing. So to show you what I mean, I'll undo. I'll make that selection, and this time I'll hit backspace, and it gets rid of that selection while deleting the pixels. So backspace is actually faster depending on what you want to do. There may be cases where you have multiple layers and you want to clear out the same shape from each of those layers. In that case, clear makes sense to use instead of backspace. If we go back to the edit menu, the last option is preferences, and we'll go to general. Here we can change some various preferences in Corel Painter. I'm going to cover this in a different section, so for now we'll just go ahead and click on cancel. The next menu option is canvas, and this deals with the canvas. Let's go ahead and open a canvas here. And if I want to resize this painting, I can go to canvas and choose resize. Now this will let me make my canvas larger or smaller. So right now it's 4,000 pixels wide. I can change my unit of measurement to inches. Now I can see it's 26 and 669 inches wide. So if I wanted to make it 14 inches wide, I could do that. It automatically changes the height to maintain this aspect ratio. And when I click on OK, it makes my canvas smaller. Now this is throwing away some information, and that's okay. You can make larger images smaller, and that's not a problem. Now, of course, you would want to save your original as the large version and then save a copy as the smaller version, but resizing is really kind of a one-way street. If I do an undo, and I go to Canvas, Resize, I could make this bigger. I could try to make this 60 inches wide. And if I do that, it does make my artwork larger, but if I zoom in to 100% here, it gets a little bit pixelated and blurry, and it doesn't necessarily do the best job quality-wise. Looking at it in this video, you might not really see a difference, but if you try it in real life, depending on the type of artwork that you're trying to enlarge, it might not look so good. And that's because you can't add information, you can't add detail. Your computer doesn't know what that detail is. You can only really throw information away and have the image look good. But there are always exceptions, and some images might not look too bad if you blow them up just a bit. I'm going to go back to Canvas Resize. We can also change the resolution, and that's the amount of detail per inch in your image. I'm not going to go into detail about resolution in this course. You can watch my reference video on that. But if you want to, you can change the resolution. If you go to measure in pixels and we check constrain file size, we're not going to be able to change the pixel size, but we can change the resolution. Then we can change the density of pixels per inch to make the image more or less detailed. If you want to get a feel for the size of your image, you can preview the current size. And if you want to reset everything, you can click on Reset. Let's cancel out of this and undo that enlargement. I'm going to go to Canvas. Now I'm going to choose Canvas Size. Now Canvas Size is different than Resize. Resize is going to make the entire image bigger or smaller. Canvas Size will just add or subtract around the edge of your canvas to enlarge the canvas size without changing the size of the image itself. So I could add 1,000 pixels to the top, and it does just that. It adds 1,000 pixels to the top of my canvas. I'll do an undo to remove that. Let's go to Canvas. We'll choose Rotate Canvas. Now this isn't going to rotate your view of the canvas. It's going to rotate the canvas. So let's say you wanted to take something and flip it upside down permanently. You could do that. You could flip it vertical. And let's say this is how it's supposed to look. It's supposed to be upside down. It's abstract or something. Now when you go to save it, it's always going to open in this orientation. I'll do an undo. As I mentioned, that's different than just rotating your canvas temporarily to preview it upside down. I'll go to Canvas, Rotate Canvas. Now I can rotate it clockwise or counterclockwise. I can even choose an arbitrary rotation, which will actually take it and permanently rotate it a bit, but fix it on screen. It's also going to add some white space around the edges though. And you can also flip the canvas horizontal, which can be helpful. Sometimes you get kind of bored of looking at something, and flipping it horizontally gives you a fresh perspective. Other times it helps you see mistakes. So I like to flip my canvas horizontally a lot, and sometimes I'll flip it near the end and keep it that way. If we go back to the canvas menu, we can turn the tracing paper on and off. This deals with cloning, and we'll be looking at cloning later, so for now we'll skip over this. And the last option is set paper color, and we can do that to set the color of the paper. But you can also do that when you create a new canvas. You can choose that color here if you don't want to start with a white canvas. So that's it for the canvas menu. Let's move on to the layers menu. This deals with various layer commands. Now we haven't gone in depth into layers yet, so I'm not really going to go in depth into this panel at this point, but we can create new layers, we can duplicate layers, and we can move them around. We'll come back to some of that stuff in a bit. The select menu lets you manipulate selections, so we can select all to select everything on our canvas. That puts a selection around the edges of the canvas. We can deselect the selection by selecting none. Just create a new canvas. This time I'll set the color back to white for my paper color because that's a permanent change. Then I'm going to fill my canvas with a color. I'll create a rectangular selection. Now I'll go to Select, Invert Selection. Now if I hit backspace, I'm erasing outside the selection, but I could do a couple of undos before I inverted, and now if I hit backspace, then I'm removing the pixels inside that selection. So basically it's just turning the selection inside out, so you're selecting outside of the selection rather than inside. If we deselected, we could also reselect. So if I select none, then I can select reselect to get that selection back. I can go to select float, and that will cut that selected area onto its own layer. And you could take it and move it around. I'm going to do some undos before I did that float command. I'm going to go to select, and I'll choose feather, and you can soften the edges or fade the edges out on your selection so it's not a sharp edge. Let's go ahead and do that by 30 pixels. It rounds the edges a bit, and if I go ahead and fill that and deselect the selection, you can see the edges are feathered out. Do some undos. We'll go to select, feather. Let's feather it just a bit, let's say 3 pixels. Now you can see the edge is not quite as soft. With a selection active, if we go to the selection adjuster tool, we can also go to the select menu and we can widen the selection by a specific amount to make it a bit wider. Then for example, I could go to select, invert selection, select a different color, fill, then I've created that gap there in between the two colors. If I go back to my transform selection tool, you can also contract the selection to bring it in, you can smooth it out, and you can add a border. Next we'll move on to the effects menu. Here you can add special effects to your artwork. We already know how to use fill. We can just simply fill our entire canvas or fill a selection. We can also choose the opacity of that fill. So if we're filling on top of something, we can have kind of a blend of both. There are a lot of effects to choose from here, but we'll be coming back to those a little bit later. For now, I'll just move on to the window menu. Now the window menu can control your view of the canvas. You can use it to zoom in and zoom out. You can fit your canvas to the screen. You can choose from the different layouts. You could even save a layout if you've arranged your canvas the way you like. This will save that layout and then you can always restore it. You can use quick switch to switch between several different layouts. And you can of course delete layouts if you don't want them anymore. We can hide the application UI, which is the same as hitting tab. We can also use shift tab to hide the panels. We can show and hide the various elements that are in our UI, such as our toolbox, or the property bar, or the brush selector, or the recent brushes, and so on. There's also a command bar that we can add that gives us quick access to save and undo, resizing our brush, changing our brush opacity. And then if we happen to have multiple documents open, we can switch between those here. Right now I only have one open, but if I went to recent and opened this other document, now I can switch between them both here. The last menu is the help menu. This gives us access to a quick start guide, tech support, help topics, and so on, but you don't need any of that stuff because you're watching this. Should you ever need your Corel Painter Essentials serial number, you can get that from About Corel Painter Essentials. You can also go to messaging settings, and if there's annoying pop-up windows that you don't like, you can turn those off here. But it does show you sales and other things that can be helpful, so sometimes it's nice to keep those on. And if you want to make sure that Painter Essentials is up to date, you can check for updates. So that's it for the menu commands up here. There are some other contextual menus that you can get by right-clicking. For example, I could right-click on the canvas, and I can get to different brush variants in that category. I can increase and decrease the brush size. I can reset the brush. If I right-click in the Layers panel, I can get to some different layer commands. So that's another way to get to some of those options that are in the menus here. So now that we've explored the menu commands, let's move on to look at some of Corel Painter's preferences.